Well, welcome, everybody. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. And, of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and this segment, no exception. Interesting topic today. We're going to be talking about money with David Wolman. Who's David Wolman? He has written for such publications as the Wall Street Journal, Mother Jones, Newsweek, and Forbes. His work has also appeared in the Best American Science Writing in 2009, which I believe at the time we did an interview with the editor of that and talked a little bit about David. He's from Portland, Oregon, which means he's got a leg up on everybody within this listening audience, at least, and best to him. David, how are you, my friend?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. The work that you've put together is called The End of Money: Counterfeiters, Preachers, Techies, Dreamers, and the Coming Cashless Society. And broad title, broad subject. Talk a little bit about the premise and what was sort of the pearl, so to speak, or the grain of sand in the oyster to get this thing started.
Sure. Well, the title, yeah, you're right, very broad. The End of Money, and of course, money is not going anywhere anytime soon. This is the end of money in its most immediately and commonly recognized form, right? Those little rectangular slips of paper and round metal plugs. Really, money in the way that you first came to understand it as a kindergartner or first grader, cash. And what is cash's future is the question at hand. And the whole thing started incredibly small for me. I read somewhere about the cost of manufacturing pennies and nickels for the economy, and right now we're at about 2.5 cents per unit per penny. And depending on the spot price of the metals, it can be as much as 9 or 10 cents per unit per nickel. And, you know, that you don't have to be an economist to know that that's pretty outrageous math. And in kicking around some ideas with an editor over at Wired, we decided that, okay, well, if we want to jump in this conversation of, you know, should we get rid of the penny or the nickel, we shouldn't really just stop there. Wired is about technology and the future and society. Let's pump it up a little bit more. So in 2008 or 2009, I wrote a pretty short, modest essay saying, look, you know, cash is this wonderful technology, but really its time has come. It is this germ-saturated, carbon-intensive, expensive relic of a bygone era, or something similarly cheeky and obnoxious and sarcastic, and, you know, let's stick a fork in it already. And in all the things I've ever really written for Wired and its ilk, this was just like a 600 or 700 word essay, yet the response was tremendous and not very happy, I should say. And we can talk about sort of why people were upset with that idea in a moment, but just the emotional freight of the response itself was a big indicator to me that, wow, this subject warrants more attention than I have given it so far. And I was just so struck by the fact that, to a great extent, we have already really marginalized cash in our financial lives today. Of course, it has sort of dug in its heels in corners of the economy, but by and large, most money already is zeros and ones on computers. If you have a bank account, if you're using plastic or wire transfer, etc., maybe you get automatic deposit for your paycheck. All these things, you know, money is mostly electronic, and yet when you say to people, "Wow, do we really need cash anymore?" they come thundering to its defense, almost as if you've insulted their mother. And that seemed like a really out of whack emotional response to cash's already marginalized place in the economy. And so to me, I just wanted to explore that dichotomy a little bit more.
Is there something, we have our credit cards, we have our debit cards, we've got all kinds of ways, again, to transfer money and spend money electronically, but is there something still, maybe it stops with the baby boomers, that feels secure about opening up a wallet or a purse and seeing some greenbacks in there? Do we need that just as a prop, if nothing else?
I think there's more than one thing that's secure and important about that. And I'm certainly not going to be someone who's lobbying for the end of cash tomorrow, let alone prematurely. This is only the kind of thing that will happen as a sort of organic fade away, almost like the payphone, right? When was the last time you sat down at a payphone at the airport? And I wonder if cash's fate is similar. But you're absolutely right about this security that you talk about. And one of the threads in the book is kind of the psychology of money and our relationship to money in different forms, which you don't really need to be a PhD to understand some of the concepts that these academics are introducing. One is something called pain and spending, right? So this is the idea that spending $100 in the form of a nice, crisp Benjamin carries with it more emotional pain, or quote-unquote pain, than parting with equivalent funds in the form of, let's say, a credit card swipe.
Right.
This is why breaking a $100 bill is more painful than spending $10 bills. And this not only is something we feel, but it dramatically influences our spending and saving behavior. So one subset of the population that is leery of this idea of cash's obsolescence are people who are in debt, or people who know someone close to them who's struggled with debt, or they're just trying to make their financial lives a little bit more responsible and careful. Maybe debt isn't killing them at this moment, but they are working on a budget, and rightly or wrongly, they believe that cash is their ally in the battle for more careful financial behavior. And that is not something to hastily dismiss. Not just the sort of emotional factor of it for people, but Americans right now, we're like $700 or $800 billion on the hook to credit card companies. So then the question is, okay, well, if we're just racing into the digital money future, is this giving people exactly what they don't need? I don't need ways to make me part with my funds faster. On the contrary, I need electronic tools that will help me be more careful with my money. But my idea on this thread is that number one, that's crucial, and number two, it should not be the end of the conversation. In other words, cash has all of these other costs. Let's say in your left hand here, and in the right hand, there are these important factors about dealing with the tactile form that you're talking about, right? When you open your wallet, there's comfort, there's safety, it's secure, I'm more careful with my spending. Okay, well, let's balance out now those costs and benefits. And in addition to that, let's come up with some technological tools for recreating that pain in spending in electronic form. In other words, I don't know about you, but I get an email reminder a week before my cell phone bill is due. Right? It's just an email note from AT&T. It says, "Don't forget your bill is coming up." I'm sure you get the same kind of things in with other bills that you get. Right? Well, that's just a tiny little piece of social engineering that's nudging you or nudging me toward slightly more responsible financial behavior, because lo and behold, surprise, surprise, people sometimes forget to pay a bill. Right? But that doesn't mean we necessarily need paper bills. It just means we need to come up with some kind of end around human frailty. And I think we can do the same thing with digital money, right? What if you were just paying for things in the digital money future by way of your cell phone, but you're at the equivalent of the cash register, and before you actually buy that sofa that you really don't need, or buy that round of martinis for everybody at the bar, you start to see these bills on fire on the screen of your cell phone, or the transaction won't go through unless you sing some really embarrassing song at a certain decibel level, or something like that. You could come up with ways to make the spending painful again, even though you don't have the physical form.
Well, we are talking about the end of money. Interesting premise indeed. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. We're talking to David Wolman, writer for the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Mother Jones et al., and he has an interesting premise, or observation at least, as we move away from the greenback, as we move away from the penny, and we move away from even the paper check, which might have been, you could probably make the case that was a halfway point there for us. David, again, you tried to go a year without spending any kind of cash at all. Tell us about that and look back on it for us.
Sure. Well, there are two motivations behind the experiment of not even touching cash for an entire year. One is, I'm not an academic or an economist. I'm a journalist and nonfiction enthusiast. So I wanted to make sure this book had a conversational feel to it, that you and I are just sitting down for brunch talking over some of these issues. And one way I thought that would be helpful was to think, well, okay, if I'm curious about the possible cashless future, what might that future actually look like? How would it impact our operations? And if I tried to do it today, what sort of hang-ups and hiccups would I run into while trying to just go about my business? Now, granted, I'm a sample size of exactly one guy, and I don't I don't work in the vending machine industry, and I don't drive a taxi or wait tables or work in some other corner of the economy where physical currency is still critical. So to a certain extent, I had a little bit of a leg up with this experiment. But nevertheless, it was a way to sort of keep a meditation on this whole idea going sort of throughout the year of writing and travel and research. And so sometimes it would be a big deal for a few weeks in a row, and then all of a sudden I had to pay the babysitter one night because my wife didn't have any cash. And I tried to get the babysitter's dad to open a PayPal account on the fly, but he wasn't enthusiastic about that idea. And so I figured this was a worthy moment for a pause in the experiment, because I was not going to steal hard-earned income from the 16-year-old babysitter for the sake of this literary experiment. So I gave myself a bye at that moment, and there were a few other things here and there, like a parking meter and this, that. And then, of course, when I flew to India to do some research for the book and how mobile phone technology is really impacting how people send money back and forth or access the banking sector, the truth is that technology is, number one, revolutionary, and number two, not at all here yet. So, in other words, you can't really do much of anything in a country like India outside maybe the airport and your hotel without getting some cash. You know, if I want to buy some water or pay for a taxi or visit some historic site, for all those things and more, to pay my translator even, I needed a big fat pile of cash. So we're certainly not there yet. But again, this was a way to kind of keep things from being too academic, right? Because some of these concepts about monetary policy and the rest of it can get kind of heady. And as a nonfiction author, you want to write something informative, yes, but you also want to write something entertaining. Otherwise, you're totally in the wrong business.
David, do you find overall people are more irritated when they can't pay cash or they can't pay electronically?
It's so funny. I think there's a really strict divide. It isn't necessarily generational, but I would say kind of the emotional intensity of the response is equal, but it's completely opposite for two different populations. You have one group that is furious that they can't pay for something with cash. The cashless cabin policy on most airlines now is a perfect example. The airlines see cash as inefficient and expensive for them, and flight attendants were sometimes skimming a little off the top for themselves. And so they finally said, okay, if you want to buy a Bloody Mary or a snack pack on an airplane, you have to use plastic. And I should say, by the way, this book is no Valentine to the credit card industry. That's a rather old technology. That's just one form of electronic money. But anyways, with the cashless cabin policy, you see people who are really upset that they can't use cash on an airplane. Then on the other side of the spectrum, there are so many people who are furious that they have to use plastic, and certainly merchants are upset with the swipe fees that they have to incur. And this is all about the friction of money, right? All different forms of money come with a cost, with a cost of doing business and transacting with them. And one of the ideas of this book was to say, cash is something that has never really undergone much scrutiny. I mean, think about it. Since you lost that first tooth as a 5-year-old, you've sort of loved this stuff, right? Well, after reaching your hand under the pillow and you feel that metallic chill of a coin, I would say, and psychologists would say 10 times over, that cash has its hooks in you. You have a relationship to these particular physical objects, unlike almost anything in the world. And so no one really stops to criticize or scrutinize cash, and yet it has all kinds of complicated hidden costs at the individual level and also at sort of the social and international level. And that was the stuff that I wanted to at least bring into the sunlight, and I might have been, because I'm something of a glutton for punishment, and really opened myself up for criticism, because there are pros and cons to that idea too. And yet, it's also a lot of fun to take something that we never really stop to think about, put it under the microscope or put it in the hot seat and say, okay, where does this stuff come from? What is its role anymore? What are its hidden costs? Let's really drill down here and honestly ask these questions about whether we need this stuff anymore.
Well, you had mentioned, I think it was 2.5 cents to manufacture a penny. Is that correct?
It's the time of writing the book. Don't quote me if it's
right.
If it's 1.9 cents today or 3 cents today. But yeah, it's lopsided, which is just cockamamie, right?
So is that a place to start? Is it time to get rid of the penny?
I think your language there on that is so appreciated. A place to start. We cannot get rid of cash tomorrow or even 6 years from now. Of course not. But the penny and the nickel, we could have said goodbye to them yesterday. And likewise, the $100 bill on the high end of the denomination spectrum. Most $100 bills, they already live overseas. It's like 70% of them. They are the beloved currency of crime, almost all kinds of crime, except sort of white-collar crime on Wall Street. And, if you're a bad guy in the mountains of Pakistan and you want to buy some kind of explosive device with which to do harm to NATO forces, there is no more welcome and widely accepted medium of exchange for making that purchase than U.S. $100 bills. And this is why the Pentagon wants to see the move toward digital money and the move away from having to fly billions and billions and billions of dollars in U.S. paper money into post-war Iraq or into Afghanistan and these places. So the $100 bill, bye-bye. The penny and the nickel, definitely. And other countries are doing this. They are saying small change just doesn't that super small change doesn't really make sense anymore. And likewise, it's not as radical as you would think here. Even in the 1969, we stopped issuing the $500 and the $1,000 note specifically for the purpose of impeding criminal operations. And so, if getting rid of cash or the cashless society is too radical or too frightening to listeners, let's start with the 100 and the penny.
David, one of the things that you talk about in the book is a connection between counterfeiting and cashless. How big of obviously without cash, counterfeiters are through. How big of a problem is counterfeiting of bills?
Well, it depends on how you define how big, right? So the good news is most U.S. paper money is authentic and secure, and I think we should, if we're not going to feel proud of that, we should at least feel secure, and that helps buttress confidence in our currency in physical form or electronic form. In other words, when someone hands you a bunch of Somali shillings, you're probably going to scrutinize them a little bit more than if you own a restaurant here in Portland or in Kansas or anywhere. People are rarely accepting paper money and holding up to the light to try and make sure it's authentic. Whether in parentheses, they probably don't even know how to decipher whether it's authentic or counterfeit, unless it's just a super shoddy knockoff. So to that extent, the number of bogus bills floating out there, not a big deal. But there's this much bigger question of how much resources we allocate towards securing the currency, right? So all of the investment in the latest whiz-bang anti-counterfeiting technology that is put into the notes themselves. So the Federal Reserve is about to roll out a new U.S. $100 bill that you've probably seen news of here and there. It has this blue security thread with little numbers on it that move when you tilt the note back and forth, and that's supposed to be cool and amazing. The note is almost 3 years late because they've had these colossal errors in the printing process, which, then they have to halt the presses, they have to launch these huge investigations, and Bureau of Engraving and Printing employees and printing company geeks are flying all over the country on your tax dollars to try and sort out this mess, to make $100 bills that nobody really uses unless they want to evade paying taxes or, buy a bunch of heroin. So then you're also having to deal with funding U.S. Secret Service operations to hunt down the counterfeiters, right? So one guy in U.S. Secret Service told me that his agency, most of their offices' work has nothing to do with protecting the highest offices of the land. Usually it's about chasing down sort of junior varsity counterfeiters who get the bright idea in the middle of the night that they're going to try and print the image of the $20 bill on, using desktop color printing technology. And these clowns usually can't get much further than buying a couple candy bars at the gas station before they get caught. And yet because Secret Service is charged with protecting the currency, we have this whole giant government agency and people telling me that the bulk of their workload is chasing down this kind of operations. And to me, that's a signal that it doesn't really matter your politics. You should be interested in government waste and streamlined government. And boy, wouldn't that be a whole area of government operations that we could trim right away just by getting rid of some of these higher denomination notes and save Secret Service a lot of workload, if not trim the agency itself.
Again, if you just joined us, we're talking to David Wolman. He is a prolific author. He also writes regularly for the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Mother Jones, et al. We're talking about the end of money, the counterfeiters, preachers, techies, dreamers, and the coming cashless society. David, we start to kind of wind down here a little bit. The book kind of wraps up with a trip that you took to a coin convention, and would like to hear your observations about those that purvey coins and just love them.
Sure. Well, it's funny. For a while, I put off talking to coin collectors and coin dealers when researching the book, because I felt like their relationship to physical money was special, and I didn't really know how to put a finger on it until I spent some more time with them. And so this was after my year-long experiment of not touching cash. And so what I did is I took a little bit of my father's childhood coin collection, and I wanted to go to a coin show and sell some of the coins, because I wanted to explore kind of the alchemy of value, I guess is the way to say it. In other words, coin dealers have a particular understanding of the fact that value comes from different places, and that there are different kinds of value. And coins really bring that idea into focus, because you have the value stamped onto the object itself, right? Let's say it's like a 2-cent piece from 200 years ago. Then you have the collector's value, because someone might pay you $500 for that piece because it fits perfectly to complete his or her collection of whatever type pennies that they covet. And then, of course, you have this other value, this emotional value, which is sort of the special sauce of physical currency. And for me, in this case, it was the fact that it was a connection to my father and childhood, and this is now kind of a family heirloom of sorts. You know, I should say parenthetically, my dad was really not much of a coin collector. He only did it as a brief hobby as a 10-year-old before moving on to marbles or something like that. But nevertheless, just the experience of trying to part with some of his coins really brought all of these different types of value into focus for me. And, you know, to a certain extent, that is at the core of what the book is about, a little less of whether cash will or will not go the way of the dinosaurs. That's important, but what was bigger for me was these ideas of what is money in the first place and what gives it value.
Well, the work and the premise is, I'd say, fascinating, but I think it's plausible. And we're talking about The End of Money, a new work by David Wolman. It is available from Da Capo Press. David, how can people find out more about the book, get a copy, and find out more about the writings that you do?
Well, I think if they just do my last name, Wolman, and Google The End of Money, they will find lots of stuff. My website is simply www.david-wolman, Wolman.com.
Hey, thanks so much. Give us a little preview. What's the next piece you got coming?
Oh, I'm writing a bunch right now about something called Bitcoin, which is one of these digital alternative currencies that has been getting a lot of buzz. And then I have some completely different topics, because I am either a pro or a hopeless generalist. It remains to be seen. So I'm writing about an earthquake in Italy in 2009, and 7 top scientists in that country were convicted of manslaughter because of things they said and did not say right before the earthquake happened.
Wow. Hey, listen, thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you again in the future for sure.
Thank you so much.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.